So as we have folks joining in today, and welcome everyone. This is the fourth webinar in our series for Sustainability Change Champions. And so hopefully you've had a chance to attend the previous webinars. If not, we will be sending out an email after this webinar in a couple of days, probably sometime early next week, with links to all four of the recorded webinars that you can go back and revisit or catch anything that you may have missed on the program. And we're really looking for your feedback as well. So feel free when I send that email out next week to respond back to me and let me know what has worked, what you've enjoyed, what you would like to see differently in the future, and what what we can maybe build on for a future series. So looking forward to everyone's feedbacks and thoughts on that. So just before we get started today, I just wanted to quickly remind you a little bit about the program. I'm the program manager for the Energy and Manufacturing in Appalachia program. For those of you who are paying keen attention, you may notice that we've made a slight branding update. We've kind of expanded. Before we were Clean Energy Manufacturing in Appalachia. We've kind of broadened out to say Energy and Manufacturing. Honestly, our goals are still the same. That's to help manufacturers in the Appalachian region to expand into energy supply chains, and also to help them to be more energy efficient and save money through their energy management tools. So nothing has changed other than our name a little bit, but still you can go, our website did slightly change as well. It is wemakeithere.org/energy, and I just put that link in the chat. And so I encourage you all to come take a look. There's going to be some new tools and some new information coming up there over the coming days, but we have a lot of the same great resources and tools available to you. So hopefully you can join us there. Likewise, we have our LinkedIn group that would be great to have you join us. That is probably the place that our program is putting the most information out on a regular basis. So you can come in there and just see what the latest and greatest is with LinkedIn. So hopefully there's some good resources out there for you through whichever format you feel most comfortable in doing. So again, just as we wrap up this series today, very happy to have you all join us through this program. It's been a great effort with the Sustainable Business Group at Pitt and WB Engineers. You guys have done a great job, obviously, and then James Wolf from ABJ has been the kind of the center, the linchpin to pull it all together and to help to make a lot of people aware of this opportunity. So I just want to thank all of you who were involved all the way across the board. And it's not over, or at least it doesn't have to be. We are going to be launching this webinar series again. We're calling it Cohort 2 to just distinguish between the two. It is going to be primarily the same information. You never know, there might be some different questions, some different references that you may get out of it if you watch again. But it's really mostly intended for those of you who have sat in on these first 4 webinars in Cohort 1. This is a good opportunity for you to let anybody know who you think they should catch up and see what it's all about. So, I think this is a great opportunity. I am just now putting in the link for the new cohort for the event that's coming up in March. And so hopefully you can get the word out, and we will be definitely sharing that with all of you very soon with some new communications. But I really look forward to your feedback and you helping us to spread the word, because if we get more people engaged, then that just gets us more excited about putting some more resources in here to do even more of this kind of work. So with that said, I am now going to turn it over to today's speakers for today's energy audit. So if you participated in last week, then you are going to be quite familiar with our two speakers today from WB Engineers. We have Bart Stewart, the Managing Director, and Desmond Green, Managing Director of Building Optimization. So welcome, guys, and I'm excited to hear more about the energy audits.
Thanks, Tom. Yep, and good morning, everybody, and happy Valentine's Day for the day that's in it. As Tom mentioned, this is the fourth webinar in the Sustainability Change Champion Series, following on from the University of Pittsburgh's presentations in webinar 1 and 2, and our presentation a couple of weeks ago about the business case for an energy audit. This morning, we'll be talking about energy audits and why now is the best time to perform one. Just some housekeeping matters. You can drop any questions that you have as we go through the presentation in the Q&A or the chat. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll address those questions. If we run out of time and we can't answer all the questions, please email us and we'll respond as soon as we can. Just again, by way of introduction, my name is Des Green. I'm Managing Principal with WB and Director of our Building Optimization practice nationally. I'm involved with a lot of projects in all of our 12 offices. I've been with WB for over 23 years. Just some details about our company. We are an MEP consulting engineering company with 200 employees, over 12 offices nationally. We've been in business just over 25 years. We celebrate our anniversary late October last year. And our markets primarily are in commercial, industrial, science and technology, critical facilities, data centers, and EV charging.
All right, thanks, Des. And Bart Stewart, I'm the Managing Director of the DC and Baltimore offices. So that's our mid-Atlantic hub. So my offices are in charge of execution on any of these projects, anywhere from Pennsylvania down through the North Carolina border and east of the Mississippi. So where Des provides kind of corporate thought leadership and oversight, where the boots on the ground who would be executing these projects, when they move forward. So with that, we're going to do a quick recap of the last presentation, so that for anybody who may have missed it or anybody who has just forgotten some of the many things we talked about. So first off, what is an energy audit? So it is a assessment of the building's energy consumption, and we identify inefficiencies and opportunities for improving a building with a focus on reducing operating costs. A little background on the process. So first, it always starts out with benchmarking, no matter how extensive your energy audit is, whether you do the level 1 quick one, but the level 3 more advanced, or the level 2, which again was the most common. We're always going to start out with our benchmarking. We're going to be establishing your energy use intensity, your EUI, and your ECI, which is your cost index, energy cost index in dollars per square foot. So that's going to happen no matter what type of energy audit you do, and that's what's going to give you your baseline against other facilities of similar types. Then we're going to go into the site survey, walk through the building, look at the systems, look for energy inefficiencies, outdated designs, poorly performing equipment. We're going to do the analysis of that. We're going to identify the energy efficiency measures, the EEMs, often called ECMs as noted here. They are not technically exactly the same thing, but they are generally used interchangeably, and everyone will know what you're talking about regardless of which one you use. We're going to be looking at the ROIs to make sure that the return on investment is valuable, and then we do a detailed report with next steps. Energy audit typically will take 3 to 4 weeks for a 50,000 square foot manufacturing facility. It can take longer for more complicated and bigger buildings. It can generally not be that much faster, even for smaller buildings. ROI wise, we're looking at 10 to 30% savings in the first year of your energy bills. that generally provides your energy audit with a less than 1 year return on investment. But like anything else, it's all dependent on what you do with it. So if you have a more limited audit, you're going to get less out of it. If you don't act on the audit, you're not going to get anything out of it. So the return on investment is really dependent on what you do after the audit is done. All right, we're going to talk about some of the buzzwords in the industry. You probably heard some of these around. Some of them are more common than others and more widely understood than others. So decarbonization. So the general idea with decarbonization is replacing any fuel burning equipment with electric equipment. So that can mean replacing boilers with heat pumps. It can mean electrifying your truck fleets. And it just one thing to understand, it is really, the term is really about your local facility. This is not intended to mean you're talking about decarbonizing the grid. That is a thing that people do talk about, but in an energy audit and facility perspective, we're really talking about decarbonizing your facility itself. And kind of trust that the grid will be decarbonized over time. So the data from the energy audit is often used as kind of your first step in identifying a full decarbonization roadmap plan, if that's what your company wants to do. So in the next section, Des is going to start talking about scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So while decarbonization can apply to all three, it really is most commonly used to describe your scope 1 emissions.
Yeah, so as Bart mentioned, when you're talking about carbon emissions, you're going to hear scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions all the time, and I'll define these in the next few slides. So scope 1 emissions are carbon emissions that are directly under the control of a facility or a building or an organization. And these are emissions from burning fossil fuel on site, such as fuel combustion in boilers, generators, water heaters, or any other fossil fuel burning equipment on site. And this is covered kind of under the umbrella of operational carbon emissions. The other one under operational carbon emissions is scope 2 emissions. And these are emissions, Bart mentioned it briefly there, these are emissions from purchased energy from the utility companies. So for power, gas, steam, if you connect to those grids, these are emissions that you have no control directly over, except for the quantity that you use in your facility or your building. So the way of reducing scope 2 emissions is to reduce the amount of energy that you take from the grid. So the energy audits will help identify scope 1 and 2 emissions. And of course, we'll identify the measures that, if implemented, will reduce those emissions. So that really the audit is aimed at operational carbon emissions. Scope 3 emissions are really important to be aware of because they are indirect emissions that occur in a company's supply chain, called embodied carbon emissions as well, also called cradle to grave emissions, because they last for the lifetime of the product. So for example, for construction material, the emissions, the scope 3 or embodied carbon emissions from a piece of material that comes onto site has a whole supply chain of emissions from it. That would include emissions from the extraction of the raw materials, the transportation of that raw material to the factory, the manufacture of that product, and then the transportation to the site, the emissions it takes to install that, and then the actual emissions from the material when it's demolished. So it covers the cradle, which is the raw material, to the grave, which is 20, 30 years from now, it being removed and either dumped or being recycled. These emissions are much more difficult to quantify. The industry is getting better and better at estimating it, but it is a lot more involved than scope 1 and 2 emissions. But again, there are ways of estimating that.
And just maybe a helpful thing, the way I remember scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions is I view it as a ranking of how much control I have over them.
Mm-hmm.
So scope 1 emissions are the number one for how much control I have over them, because I have total control to replace my boiler with something else. My scope 2 emissions, it's second. I have got a little bit of control. I can use less energy, or I can go out of my way to buy my energy from a different source. So a little more, depending on your utility company, of course. So a little bit of control. And then scope 3, much harder to control. And depending on what your supply chain looks like and the number of suppliers that you have to choose from, you might not have any control over that.
Yeah, and that goes back to the first webinar we did, Bart. I believe you spoke about it. Was the actual the value chain carbon emissions? You know, where you get the product from can impact your embodied carbon as well.
Yeah. So want to talk about a scenario. This is a question that came up in one of the very early presentations. And we love this question so much that we decided to make a couple slides out of it. So this person expressed that they work at a manufacturing company, so reporting the data center industry, and that their customers are focused on embodied carbon, while the parent company is pushing for energy efficiency rather than embodied carbon. How do we align targets across the different businesses? So what's so fascinating about that is they really are just different ways of talking about the same thing. So focusing on, let me take a step back. It's really about talking about the input versus the output. So everybody is talking about the same general concept. If you're focusing on energy efficiency, that's really you're focusing on what you have control over. That's going to reduce your scope 1 and 2 emissions, and the result is going to be reduced embodied carbon. So improving your facility's scope 1 and 2 can really significantly impact your emissions, lowering your embodied carbon. So, a lot of the big data center companies, that was this example, whether it's, Microsoft or Meta or whoever, they're really talking about their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So if you are able to lower your facility's scope 1 and 2 emissions, then you are reducing Meta's scope 3 emissions and reducing their value chain carbon footprint. So that's really the best way to do it. It's really as much a language barrier as anything else. And sometimes it's a matter of just getting two people in the same room and getting them to understand that they are actually talking about the same thing. They're just using different language to talk about those same things.
Yeah, so the entire theme of our presentation today is why now is the best time to do an audit. And the best time to start an audit is now, and we'll explain why here. So identifying energy efficiency measures, EEMs, as soon as you can, will give you time to develop a plan for implementing them in the next 1, 2, 5, 10 years. And in that way, it'll help you start figuring out actually where your goals are and what you're going to pay for the financial implementations and your cash flow. So identifying those really early kind of starts the conversation with your CFO, whoever controls the money in your company, and helps you plan out the implementation. We just discussed this in the last webinar in a lot more detail, but there are a lot of programs that can assist with capital costs for replacing and upgrading equipment and systems and implementation of the EEMs. Some of them can be really, really expensive. They're very capital intensive, some not so much. But there are programs, especially from the utility companies, that will cover some of those costs, and they're very, very generous. So if you are thinking just about replacing equipment, you're not doing an audit or an assessment, we really encourage you to speak to the utility companies really early they're, in our experience, they've been really helpful across all of the utility companies across the country. And the reason for that is they need to spend the money that they have in their funds, because if they don't spend the money now, they're going to lose them next year. So they're very open. They'll help you with incentives and rebates. They'll help you with identify the best programs for you. And in addition to the implementation of the EEMs, a lot of the utility companies and other state bodies will cover maybe partially or fully the cost of doing the energy audit as well. So it's a win-win situation. Besides the incentives and rebates for supporting the capital investments, there's also other avenues you can go down. CPACE loans, which are low interest long-term loans, which you can get for energy efficiency projects. You can also pursue tax deductions using Section 179 and 179D of the tax code, but you have to meet certain energy criteria. You have to prove that the project that you've done has resulted in a certain energy reduction, and then you'll get the tax deduction. And again, that can be very generous as well, and can be done proactively. We've done it for a couple of clients 2 years after the project is completed, and we've gotten them a considerable amount of money for that. And again, we talked in a little bit more detail in the previous webinar. Most municipalities, if not all now, around the country have a net zero policy. And typically the drive is to get to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. How they do that varies from place to place. So by doing the energy audit right now, or at least an emissions assessment study, allows you to see if you're compliant right now, if you're going to be compliant for the first date, maybe the second date of compliance, you're not going to meet that. And if you're not going to meet it and you're not going to do anything, what the penalty or the fine that you're going to pay is. So the audit and the implementation of the EEMs, it improves the value of the asset. You're reducing the operating costs, but you can also comply with local policies and codes and avoid those fines and penalties, which again can be considerable around the country. And the energy audit is going to provide you with a lot of data that will help you with your planning, your budgeting, your scheduling, and the data will allow you to make really informed business decisions. So by doing the audit early on, you can prepare these budgets and the schedules instead of waiting for the last minute, which a lot of people do, but the cost of doing the audit is really worth doing it right now. And then finally, again, the information from the audit allows you to set realistic sustainability goals. So as change champions for your company, you're probably thinking about what are realistic sustainability goals that I can develop with the company. Is that net zero by 2040? Is that goal actually realistic? And if we want to do that, how much is it going to cost in the next 5-10 years? Or maybe, you know what, not net zero by 2040, we go net zero by 2045, and we can push that financial burden out as well. So with that, all that data allows you to make those realistic sustainability goals and gives you a solid foundation to work from. And so in the first two webinars of the series, Marcel and John from University of Pittsburgh talked about what it is to become a change champion and how you go about it. And now that you are the change champion, the question is where and how do you start? So we recommend you engage an engineering company to perform an audit for you. And the audit has to provide you with energy efficiency measures that are fully actionable. And when we say fully actionable, we mean that they're buildable. You can actually build them. They can be maintained properly, and they're operable. A lot of the audits that I've seen in my career, some of the energy efficiency measures, yes, if you can implement them, they'll result in these great energy savings, but they're a little bit pie in the sky. Sometimes the equipment doesn't quite fit properly. It doesn't look at the impact of the actual business in the manufacturing space, where you're going to have downtime. All that information should be within the audit, so that any of the efficiency measures are really thought about in real good detail. And then most importantly, they have to reduce in carbon emission reductions. It's pointless otherwise.
Yes, there's one thing I want to kind of reiterate in what you're describing there. There are in the world lists of common EEMs. There are different organizations that have published lists of common EEMs. So that's really lowered the barrier of entry for people who want to say that they do energy audits. So there's really two groups of folks that you might get a proposal from. There's going to be MEP firms, engineering firms, and there's going to be sustainability consultants. In our experience, kind of what Des was describing with those past reports that are not quite stellar, is those are folks who are running off the list and saying, all right, we have a fan, it doesn't have a VFD on it. Our EEM is to put a VFD on it. And that's an easy thing to say if you don't consider all of the other impacts. So if the engineering firms have a higher level of skin in the game, because you're going to turn around and say, all right, well, you're an engineering firm, can you design these for me? And so the engineering firms have to be able to give you recommendations that are actually implementable, because they're going to be the ones on the hook to design and oversee construction on them. I know I'm a little bit biased, but if I was getting one for myself, I'd rather get a mediocre report from a mediocre engineering firm than a flashy report from an amazing sustainability consultant. All right, enough about that, sorry. Okay, so who should be involved? A lot of people need to be involved in the energy audit for it to be successful in the long term. So first of all, you're going to have your facility manager. They're the ones who oversee everything at the facility. They're often the ones who will be, sending out the RFP for the energy audit. The operations managers are critical because they're the ones who are going to provide the necessary feedback to make sure that the EEMs that are recommended won't negatively impact the operations of the building. So they're the ones who are going to know how the workflow works, what the environmental requirements are, all of those things, so that those energy efficiency measures are truly actionable. The maintenance team is the one who knows all of the equipment. I have also seen that if they are not involved in the process, there's an emotional negative reaction to the energy audit. Whereas if you bring them along for the ride and kind of view it as an extension of their work, they're much more likely to be on board and be supportive of the effort.
And just Bart, in terms of that, you're going to get a lot more better information from them as well. They know where the problem points are. They know where the issues are, and identifying those early on the audit allows everybody to address them.
Finance and procurement teams. So you got to hire somebody to do the energy audit itself. That's your first RFP. But then you got to go and do things afterward. The energy audit is only the roadmap. So if you don't have the buy-in from the finance team about investing in the next steps after the energy audit, it will not be successful. It will sit in a drawer and will have been a waste of money. Obviously, the energy auditor, don't need to spend any time on that. And the senior management one is interesting. The more, and this goes back to, a lot of the University of Pittsburgh content, the more you can get that buy-in from the top to keep momentum moving, always helpful. If you don't, this is that sort of working around the system. You have potential, if you can get the money for the energy audit without necessarily having the blessing of your senior management, it will give you information to hopefully get buy-in for the next steps. But obviously these things are all much smoother if you have that senior management buy-in from the very beginning. So then a little bit about your role in the process. So before the energy audit, there's a lot of data that needs to be provided. It's going to be the design blueprints of the building, and utility bills, things like that are going to be needed for the energy audit. During the audit, you need to facilitate access to the space. You're going to need to interact directly with the auditors, sharing information, answering questions. And then afterward, you need to implement the changes. As I've said, if you don't do anything with the audit, it's not going to be a successful audit. And then the piece that I see as kind of the biggest gap in my experience doing energy audits and seeing the follow-up is not having enough tracking of progress. So if you don't have the right metering in place, if you're not keeping a record of when you completed a project, then you don't have the ability to come back a year, 2 years later and say, hey, we did these things and it saved us X dollars. Maybe your utility bills went down some amount. That can also be weather. That could also be change in process. So, tracking in a meaningful way will really help show the value in the long term. Because in the long term, people will ask, hey, we did that energy audit. Did it do anything? And if you can say, yes, we metered these things, and look, we dropped, 200 kilowatt hours a month, that makes a big difference in other people seeing the success of the project. All right, so we talked a little high level stuff. We're going to talk about some specific case studies. I'll turn over to Des for our first one here.
Yeah, thanks, Bart. Yeah, so we've got 2 case studies for projects that we've performed for clients in the past few years that provide real live numbers, and they'll give you an idea of the real world impact that an audit can have and the results that can be achieved. So the first case study is for a project that we completed for a national company that had been a client of ours since we started the company over 25 years ago. They're a national telecommunications company, and they have pretty aggressive sustainability and decarbonization goals. Their operational net zero goal is to be net zero by scope 1 and 2, as we discussed in the last few slides, by 2035. And to reduce their scope 3 emissions by 40% by 2040. So to achieve these goals, they invited us to partner with them on a number of phases of their decarbonization program. They have a lot of buildings in the major municipalities around the country. And so the first phase of this was a detailed energy audit and retrocommissioning of 9 buildings in New York City. Just over 2 million square feet. We mentioned briefly what retrocommissioning is in the last webinar, but it's a retuning of the building and the building systems to make sure that the systems are working optimally. It's always an EEM in our books. It's a really low cost, high impact measure. And doing a retrocommissioning, if you haven't done it in a few years on your building, you should. You're going to see a reduction in energy of at least 10, maybe 15% over the first year, and the return on investment is less than a year again, so it's really effective. But anyway, this project was for 9 buildings, over 2 million square feet. The buildings were of various vintage from 1910 through the 1980s. Lots of different types of systems, from central plants to unitary systems. We had electric chillers, absorbers, turbines, a lot of air handling units, boilers, steam boilers, hot water boilers, Con Ed steam. And we went into the buildings and followed the process that we've outlined in the webinars to date, and really did a detailed walkthrough and survey of all the systems and all the buildings. So what their baseline, when we did the assessment of the carbon emissions for Local Law 97, they would have been, if they did nothing from our baseline, they would have been paying about $4 million in penalties annually, which is a considerable amount of money. So we developed the energy efficiency measures, developed roadmaps, and so the roadmap allowed them to see how they could implement the energy efficiency measures and meet the compliancy goals by 2029, 2034, and so on. And so the output of that was that over the 2 million square feet that we did the detailed audit and the retrocommissioning, we identified over $3 million in annual energy savings. And then that meant that they comply with Local Law 97. They could save or not have to pay $4 million in penalties for not complying with Local Law 97, and an overall reduction of 27% of energy use and carbon greenhouse gas emissions, which is considerable for that building. So that was a really successful program that we started, and we're on to the third phase now, and identifying similar kind of measures with similar reductions. So it's a real world case. The audits are really powerful. The data that we used allow them to plan all the way out to 2035, 2040, plan implementation, how it impacts their current current facilities, because some of if you're switching out boilers and chillers, it's going to impact the operation of their critical facilities within the spaces and occupied facilities. So it was really detailed audit, went very well. So that's the first case. Bart, do you have another one that you can share?
Yeah. So this next one, I'm going to take a step back. We've talked very much about holistic energy audits and looking at the whole building, and Dez's example there was a step further, where you're looking at a whole group of buildings for that energy audit. The focus on this slide is really, it doesn't have to be the whole building. So in this case, we had a client who had a specific system. They had two big old cast iron fire tube hot water boilers, and they were reaching their end of the life. They were needed to repair cracks every couple of years, and they were spending more and more money on keeping these boilers running, and they knew that it was time to replace them. So I said, "Hey Bart, can I have a proposal to design replacing of these boilers?" And we said, "Yeah, we can do that, but I don't think that's necessarily the best answer for this facility. Let's do a targeted assessment. We'll do a quick study phase on this project and determine if that really is your best bet, to continue with this 1981 design or go to a more modern design." The ultimate result was that we replaced those big fire tube boilers with high efficiency condensing boilers. We changed the sequence of operation of the plant, and ultimately ended up with a 40% reduction in a natural gas bill every year, which actually exceeded even my expectations. I would have been happy with a 30% reduction. So it took a $400,000 project and made it a $440,000 project, and saves them like $50,000 a year in natural gas. So, it's doesn't have to be a whole big thing. It really can be targeted on, like, if you have a good asset list and you know what you have and you know when you need to replace things, you can tack on a very small energy study for that particular system or for that equipment, and make sure that when you go to spend that investment, you're spending it wisely. Because at that point, when you're calculating your ROI, we already knew we had to spend $400,000. So we're not looking at, are we saving money on $440,000? We're only looking at, is the additional $40,000 worth the amount of money that we're going to save on natural gas? And when you look at it that way, when you already have to replace the equipment, the ROI has come way, 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 way down. Replacing these boilers just to get the energy efficiency, it would have paid for itself eventually before the end of the life of the boilers, but it would have been a 10-year ROI, which is generally something most of our customers won't accept, versus a 10-month ROI, which really anybody would find appealing. All right, we're going to jump into some key takeaways. So we're here to talk about operating costs. There are lots of painful ways to reduce operating costs. This is an easy one. It does not require changing your process. It doesn't require letting anybody go. It doesn't require any kind of top-down change. It can be a very much bottom-up, easy to implement on the side way to reduce operating costs. Buildings are sometimes your most valuable asset. So an energy audit is one of the best tools available to ensure that you're managing that asset intelligently, and you're spending your money appropriately for your largest asset.
And there are ways of funding and cost sharing implementation of energy efficiency measures. Again, with the high cost chiller plant replacements and the air handling unit replacements, there are incentives and rebates with utility companies and other state bodies that will support you for doing that. And there's also a lot of the utility companies will actually cost share or pay for the energy audit as well. And so the best thing are baby steps. Doing an audit gives you the information to be able to plan to implement, and allows you to take the smaller, low cost, low, high impact measures before taking on the major capital intensive improvements. So baby steps are always the best way. Again, with the audit, it'll allow you to take those baby steps and kind of plan your way out to where you want to be in terms of your sustainability goals. And again, there's simple ways you can address this as well in terms of baby steps. You can look at your operating schedules for your HVAC units. You can look at the schedules for running fans. Do your lights run 24/7? Do they have to be on 24/7? Can you install like simple lighting controls? So there are really good ways of reducing energy usage and operating costs by just looking at kind of simple things like scheduling and lighting.
Another nice thing, Des, about baby steps is, one of the biggest challenges in being a change champion is there are some people who are just resistant to change altogether, and there are some people who just don't care about sustainability. So you don't have to make it about sustainability. If you have this energy audit, you can say, hey guys, look at how much money we can save. You don't have to talk about greenhouse gas emissions with a guy who doesn't want to hear it. You can focus on the dollars and do those little things. And then eventually people will come around to the fact that, hey, these things, these sustainability things do actually make sense for our company and do make our company stronger and more resilient, and more cost competitive. So the baby steps, that's, when you're talking about becoming a change champion, each of those incremental steps to show success with smaller things will help you control the argument when you talk about bigger things. And we always want to talk about what can you do on Monday. Similar thing, we talked about a similar thing on the last webinar, and it's ask a simple question. Does your HVAC turn off at night? Do the lights turn off at night? Do we change the way the building operates in the summer and winter? These are all pretty quick little questions that you can ask to your maintenance folks to get them thinking about energy efficiency and educate yourself, so you can be a better advocate when you go to talk to your folks to talk about getting an energy audit done.
Yeah, the other thing I didn't mention was set points, Bart. We come across that quite a bit, is that a whole facility is the set point is way low because there's one little area in the corner that isn't satisfied. And the whole system is run down really low in terms of the temperature supply set point. Things like that are or
you see you see offices that are set to 72 degrees, which makes sense, and then the server room is set to 65 degrees, and now that server room is trying to cool the entire office. If it's the winter, you might even have the heating system running, trying to cool all of the cold air that just came out of the server room. And in reality, 65 isn't even recommended for server rooms anymore. So that's like an easy one that we see all the time. You go in there, you hit the up button on the thermostat a couple times, give it the same set point as the rest of the office, and all of a sudden that unit doesn't have to work nearly as hard. All right, so the recap of the last 4 webinars, how to become a change agent within your organization so you can drive sustainability. I'm sorry, we are going to do these 4 again. That's why I'm talking about this. So if there's any that you missed, we'll drop a registration link in the chat so you can do them, participate again in the future.
I believe Tom has already dropped the registration in there. So if you take a look in the chat, you can register to attend all of these 4 webinars again if you like, or if you want to extend those to somebody else who hasn't been on, you think they'll be interested. That'd be great if you can forward that registration.
Yep. And so the first 2 were University of Pittsburgh. This is really all about how to be that change champion. And then our webinars 3 and 4, really that practical implementation of energy reduction in your facilities. And with that, we will go to our Q&A. Looks like we've got about 15 minutes to take questions. If we want to pull up the chat or the Q&A. Chat looks like is.
Yeah, so Bart, if you look, looks like there are a couple in Q&A. The first one, we can see what insights anyone here may have on the panel, but are there any updates on the Department of Energy's IAC or the USDA REAP grants? And for just everyone's knowledge, these are 2, they have been great sources for grant funds to help to make improvements to a facility to become more energy efficient and reduce emissions, and really invest in equipment and facility improvements that can open up hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yeah, unfortunately, I believe with both of these grant programs, they have been put on pause. Again, I think there's just some uncertainty out there right now about, what's going on with federal grant funding. There has been some maybe unwanted attention about clean energy and some of these topics, but our hope is that we will see these open back up. They are a great opportunity, and I would say that it's still in your best interest that if you have some significant improvements that you want to make to your facility that would be eligible, getting that energy assessment, it has other value other than helping to set you up for applying for these grants. But, getting that ready when these do open up, if and when these do open up, those that are ready to get their applications in quicker may have, it may be to their benefit. But how about Bart and Des, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I was going to echo exactly what you just said.
Yep. That's what we're hearing as well.
Yep. The next 3 are actually very related and all about scope 3 emissions and the challenges associated with figuring them out and documenting. So that first one, I think I'll answer the first one and sort of we'll touch on the other ones. But the biggest challenge companies face, the question is, what are the biggest challenges companies face when measuring and reducing scope 3 emissions? And the biggest challenge 100% is getting information from your suppliers. It requires suppliers to track that information and to provide it to you. So you ask anybody trying to track their scope 3 emissions, that will be the answer that you're going to get, is that I ask my suppliers for their carbon emissions or their embodied carbon of a product, and they don't have it. And
yeah, Bart, I'll add to that as well, because we've I've been involved in especially with the contracts that we have with some major companies. Now they require all of their vendors, including consultants, to report on their scope 1 and 2 emissions, so that they can start reporting on the scope 3 for the ESG. It directly impacts their ESG ratings. And so on our end, it's really difficult. We understand how difficult it is because we've had to do it. Reporting on scope 1 and 2 to a larger company so they can track their scope 3 emissions. And the way we do it is you can become, they may require you to get rated with a company like, or rating company like EcoVadis or one of those. But it can be difficult. But that's the biggest challenge, is getting your vendors being educate themselves on how to actually report on scope 1 and 2 emissions.
So, and that is the first step to the next question, how can businesses engage suppliers to reduce emissions across the value chain? You know, people follow the money. The first thing you can do is require them to include their scope 1 and 2 emissions in their proposals to you. So when they provide a proposal, a quote for materials, whatever it is, that you require them to include that emissions data, and then you can factor that into your selection. So if you get quotes from 2 different vendors, is your company willing to maybe spend a couple dollars more to go with the company that has the documented lower emissions? If you can do that, then, and you tell the losing company that that's why they didn't lose it, or that's why they didn't win the contract, you're going to drive change in that company. That's now the sales folks saying, hey, I just lost a sale because we can't document these emissions properly.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Bart, as well, because we're involved in a organization called MEP 2040, which is a drive to a drive for net zero in all our projects by 2035 and body carbon by 2040. And what you can do is you can request when you're in construction or you're getting supplies from vendors, there is something called an EPD, which is an environmental product declaration, and it's actually a certificate that they can provide you. A lot of them will, a lot of them can't because they haven't done it yet. That actually itemizes how much embodied carbon there is from the manufacturer and of their product. So we request that when we're involved in projects, we request it from, if we list let's say three chiller manufacturers, we request the EPDs, and sometimes depending on who our client is, they may that may be a critical part of their selection, is that these two people or these two companies have an EPD and this one doesn't, they're eliminated. We'll deal with these other two. So there are certifications that you can get for materials and equipment and supplies.
Unfortunately, the next one I don't have a great answer for. The best way to estimate and track scope 3 emissions when data availability is limited. Do you have any ideas on that one, Des?
Yeah, and we can and I should have had it. We can respond to everybody's attended here. There's a lot of software platforms out there, and I can get the top 3 or 5. What we're finding is the architectural industry and structural industry is way ahead of the MEP industry in terms of being able to track and measure embodied carbon on their projects. MEP is catching up, but very slowly. So there are software platforms out there you can actually use if you are doing a project to estimate your embodied scope 3 emissions. But again, it's complicated and it takes a while to get through it. Some of the projects will require you to do some calculations as well, and they can get messy and it's I would say, for the want of a better term, it's a real rough estimation at the moment for scope 3 emissions. But we can follow up with a link to various software platforms.
How are emerging technologies enhancing the effectiveness of energy audits? Example, AI-driven analytics, Internet of Things sensors. That is still, I would say, in its relative infancy. We do have an audit that we did that was sort of one of those focused audits. We weren't looking at the whole building. We were looking at one data center room, and we put out 40 different temperature and humidity loggers throughout the building, or throughout the room, at different rack elevations and then different spaces and different rows, really to map out how effective or how much extra air they were moving that they didn't need to, by being able to develop a kind of heat map throughout the room. That was very effective. That technology, in theory, some of it's been around for a long time, but what's changed recently is how much easier it is to implement it with the Bluetooth devices and the ability to walk through the room and your phone just sucks in all the data. versus having to grab them one by one and plug them into a USB and download it manually. So things like that are becoming a lot better. I think the drive for metering or the understanding of the importance of metering and smart metering has really gone a long way in improving the effectiveness and sort of showing where in the building it might be the most necessary. As of right now, there are no AI-driven analytic platforms that I know of that are providing a lot of value in the energy audit world. But being able to log and measure data over time has been very valuable. The biggest barriers to implementing audit recommendations. In my experience, the biggest barrier is not having a champion for the effort. So if somebody is told, Steve, in your building in Maryland, you got to do an energy audit, he's going to go do an energy audit, and then he's going to check that off his list. The energy audit goes in his drawer, and he can say that he did his job because he got his energy audit done, and nothing comes out of it. You have to have somebody who, let's start with reading the energy audit. That often doesn't happen if it is forced onto somebody. Read it, understand it, ask questions, and then get buy-in. And, you're going to need somebody then to spend money, which requires pushing. People don't like to spend money. So, if you're going to be trying to push to get it into, next year's budget, so you do the energy audit early 2025, and then try and budget money for 2026 to implement some of the recommendations. So you got to have a champion who really understands the budgeting cycle also.
And costs as well, of course, Bart, costs of implementing the audit
course.
recommendations.
Yeah.
And we talked about that. There are ways of paying for those that you're not 100% out of pocket. So again, if you're even thinking about replacing motors, fans, anything like that, if you're going for a higher efficiency motor or fan or piece of equipment, the utility company may give you an incentive or rebate, or may pay for part of that, or the study for it. There are ways of supporting it again.
And
let me. I've had a lot of conversations with this since the SEC came out with the initial offering, and people were saying it's never going to go through. We don't care about it, and whatever. I mean, I've had whatever your politics are. Again, Bart, you mentioned it before. You got to follow the money, and if you follow the money, the SEC dropping the climate disclosure, okay, they drop it, but I will say investors, large investors and smart investors, and investors in facilities and businesses and buildings are not always from the United States as well, but even those based in the United States want to know what's going on in the building. They want to know what sort of organization that they're investing in. And so whatever way the SEC reporting or ESG morphs into, that information is out there, and the businesses who have the money have seen this information, seen these disclosures, and they make business decisions based on those. So whether it's the SEC or ESG, I think the businesses are going to demand that transparency anyway.
All right, well, that's the last in the Q&A, and we're just about out of time. Tom, any closing thoughts for us?
No, I just think this is another fantastic, program, and great information on energy audits. And one of the things that really stuck with me that you all said and that we are finding is that, while we know there are a lot of great reasons for a company to become more sustainable and to, work into that area, that's not always a driving factor for everyone, but more universally is saving money. And so just the same thing with our program, we find that is often a great way to bring people into the whole sustainability journey, because there is a profitable, cost savings aspect to it. And then once someone becomes aware and sees all of the great impacts, that it can have, you can kind of bring someone in further. So I thought that was a great statement today, and definitely something for all of us who aspire to become change champions. That's maybe a great way for us to reach out into our worlds, our environments as we go forward. So thank you both today. Thank you for everyone who has participated. Like I said, we will be sending out next week a link to all 4 recorded webinars. This is more intended for your reference, so you can go back and look at. And then, like I said, please either sign up if you want to watch the new live webinars again yourself, but especially help to bring in more people that in your circle to learn about the importance of sustainability and becoming a change champion. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
Tom.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Bye.